She's a politician. She's a diplomat. She's the Foreign Affairs Minister of Ecuador. My guest is the President of the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly, Maria Espinosa.
No, I'm very pleased to be here with you.
Okay. When you came to Nigeria, you sustained one position, which is the fact that Africa is the future of development in climate change and other issues. Why?
Well, I think Africa is one of the most promising continents in terms of not only climate change, in terms of economic development, in terms of the potential in its human capital, in its capacities, demographically speaking. It's a huge continent, and we have to ensure that the younger generations get the right education, the right opportunities, and are really taken as a very important part of society. And I think that we should look at Africa, but also to call for international community to respond to some of the issues and support Africa in its efforts to meet the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda.
What were the priority areas?
Well, in consultation with member states, of course, we came up with 7 priorities for this year. One of them, of course, being climate change, the priority on migration and refugees, which is an issue that is very important for Africa, very important for Nigeria, if we consider that more than 2 million Nigerians are internally displaced persons because of violence and insecurity situations. So the migration and refugee agenda is extremely important. The issue of gender equality, we cannot leave 50% of the population behind if we are to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, if we are to fight poverty, inequality, discrimination and violence. Women they have to be part of the story, part of the decision-making bodies. The other issue that is extremely important for the future of humanity in general, for the future in Africa in particular, is job creation, access to employment. For 2030, the world needs to create 600 million new jobs, and not any kind of job, 600 million decent jobs. That's why the connection and the partnership between the public sector and the private sector is so important. We need to create jobs for the younger generations. I also established the rights of persons with disabilities and the rights and dignity as a priority, the revitalization and the reform of the United Nations, and we are working on that, and something that is also extremely important to Africa, which is youth, peace and security. The role of young people as peacemakers, young people as mediators of peace. And this agenda, of course, keeps us very, very busy. The General Assembly is the most democratic and universal body of the United Nations. I represent 193 states. And of course, one of my main commitments is make sure that we work hand in hand with Africa. My visit to Nigeria was to strengthen the ties of collaboration between the Nigerian government, the Nigerian people, and the work of the United Nations.
Welcome to Diplomatic Ties.
And we're doing our best to make it as convenient and easy as possible for prospective students.
What we can do is just support the efforts of West African countries to integrate, to organize a better regional, political and economic integration.
Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Diplomatic Ties, building friendship and enhancing oneness among nations. Watch Diplomatic Ties on NTA International.
From the Women's Center, the president proceeded to University of Abuja, where she engaged the students on the need to do their best in order to excel in any field they have chosen.
You are instinctively multilateral and multilateralists. This is why we cannot afford to exclude you from decision making.
Some of the students had the opportunity to interact and tap from a wealth of experience and put in perspective their expectations.
The UN, as a mother body of all nations in the world, should make and postulate a policy that would be and serve as a watchdog towards African leaders.
The way to go about it is entrepreneurship. If youth can involve in entrepreneurship, do things for themselves, through that we can be able to develop our country and ourselves.
And when we look at the perspective of consuming economies and productive economies, how workable is multilateralism, given the fact that even the institutions within multilateralism are threatened?
Well, I think that we need more multilateralism and not less. When we say the word multilateralism, it's like a big word, it's even long to pronounce, but multilateralism is about working together, it's about cooperation, it's about agreeing on the fundamentals to address the global challenges. Absolutely. If you look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, you will see that we have to work together to build a better world. We cannot fight poverty alone. We cannot fight inequality alone. We cannot fight climate change alone. Can we fight terrorism and violent extremism by ourselves? No. We have seen what happens, in the Dubai area and in the Lake Chad Basin. There is a need for all the countries involved to sit together and work together. That's why, the Lake Chad Commission was created, and it's chaired now by Nigeria. The task force for the Lake Chad was also created more on the security front. And with these efforts made by governments, they need to be equated to the responsibility of the international community and of the UN through our programs and agencies. So that is multilateralism in action.
Because the concern has been the adaptability and domestication of issues within multilateralism. For instance, if a particular concept beneficial to all becomes a problem domesticating in Nigeria, it becomes a problem.
Well, definitely. Whatever we do, multilateral system is about discussing, agreeing, and committing to address global challenges. But of course, they have to land at the national level, at the local level. Local governments, they have a very important role to play at the ground level. So it is a scale up and scale down challenge. But the very important message is that we cannot tackle the challenges that humanity faces today without a strong multilateralism, without strong cooperation, with collective action, with collective leadership. And that's exactly what multilateralism is about. And the main home of multilateralism is precisely the organization of the United Nations. And I am very proud to represent the Parliament of the United Nations, which is the General Assembly, where we do the norm setting, the policy recommendations, where we craft the Global Compact on Migration, the 2030 Agenda, and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We create the norms, the frameworks, the policy, but then these policies need to land at the national level.
President of the 73rd General Assembly of the United Nations is in Nigeria to discuss, among other issues, the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, regional peace and security, Nigeria and the transition to the 74th General Assembly of the United Nations, among others. This interaction with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Geoffrey Onyama, raises issues relating to Nigeria's role in global development as well as domestic management, taking advantage of multilateral platforms.
We are a government and a country that believes in multilateralism. We believe that in the globalized world of today, the future really rests with multilateralism to address all the various problems and challenges of the world.
Maria Espinosa commends Nigeria for playing a key role in regional and international engagements, a development she says makes her suitable for many responsibilities, including the presidency of the 74th United Nations General Assembly.
Nigeria is a very strong, reliable partner of our organization and our system. We are very much looking forward to working together with Nigeria to have a smooth handover and transition process for the incoming Nigerian presidency to the 74th session of the General Assembly.
The two expressed confidence that challenges of insecurity, underdevelopment and migration will improve with more synergy between Nigeria and the United Nations.
When Nigeria's president started talking about recharging the Lake Chad, some did not understand, but eventually the understanding came. And one of the things you do for Africa, for Nigeria, is giving a global awareness on the need to recharge the Lake Chad. Where are we with this?
Well, I think this is a major project. As I understand, it requires more than 50 billion, between 50 billion and 70 billion dollars to happen. I would say that if this is going to bring prosperity and future for the 30 million people depending on Lake Chad, it's worthwhile. And I'm sure that the resources are there, and we need to appeal to the international partners for co-responsibility, for support, and for being, good multilateralists to solve and address this critical problem. Lake Chad is the typical problem, it's a microcosm of how climate change, development, and security go hand in hand. If you solve the environment crisis, you can solve at the time the poverty crisis, and in solving the poverty crisis, you can also tackle the insecurity crisis. So if we are able if we can be successful in addressing the Lake Chad challenges, we will prove that the multilateral system works, that international partnerships work, and also that there is a need to tackle these regional, supranational challenges through the cooperation of the countries involved as well.
During the interactive session, President Muhammadu Buhari told the President of the United Nations General Assembly, Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garcias, that Nigeria has a record of at least 1 million children who neither know their parents nor where they come from. Across the Northeast in particular, he said, bridges have been blown up while schools, hospitals, churches, mosques, and other buildings were destroyed. President Buhari said such infrastructural facilities must be rehabilitated and every form of international help is welcome. On the need for the recharging of Lake Chad through interbasin water transfer from the Congo River, the president said no fewer than 30 million people are negatively affected by the shrinking lake, with at least half of them being Nigerians. Such an undertaking, he explained, is beyond the financial power of the affected countries and therefore stressed the important role of the international community in the endeavor. The President, United Nations General Assembly, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, while addressing journalists shortly after, commended Nigeria for being a key part of the United Nations system, saying the country is well respected in the global body.
Nigeria is very well recognized as a champion of multilateralism, main actor of the UN peacekeeping efforts. Nigeria is also responsible for having declared the 24th of January the International Day for Education. It has promoted the agenda of illicit financial flows and assets recovery in a very strong and and vocal campaign to fight corruption, but at the same time to find the resources for the very ambitious implementation of 2030 agenda and the sustainable development goal.
She also applauded President Muhammadu Buhari's leadership of ECOWAS and the Lake Chad Basin Commission to the heartening effects of the Lake Chad problem and other issues raised by the Nigerian leader.
Lake Chad is one of the living examples of a multidimensional crisis. It is, on one hand, a painful example of what climate change does to the livelihoods of people. And this, of course, combined with violent extremism, and we know the damaging presence of Boko Haram, and the humanitarian emergencies because of internally displaced persons. If we succeed to improve the environmental conditions of Lake Chad, if we succeed to bring development and dignity to the 30 million people depending on Lake Chad, then we can say that the international community was able to deliver. And perhaps more importantly, I am here to send the message that the UN matters, that the UN is working hard to improve the quality of life of people, and that the UN does exist to be relevant to the people we serve.
The President of the United Nations General Assembly used the opportunity to express formal appreciation to Nigeria for rehabilitating the UN building in Abuja, destroyed by Boko Haram insurgents during an attack in August 2011.
You met with the academia, you met with youths, and you met with women in Nigeria, and all was hinged around multilateralism. Did you achieve your target?
Definitely. I had a very fruitful conversation with President Buhari. We exchanged some views about challenges in Nigeria, but I also praised Nigeria for being such an important actor of the United Nations. Nigeria is seen as a very well-respected voice at the United Nations. Nigeria is going to take over the presidency of the General Assembly next year, and we are preparing for that transition, of course. And it's a very well-deserved position because Nigeria has contributed a great deal to the United Nations. Nigeria is now member of the Human Rights Council. It has chaired the group of countries that are troop contributing countries to our peacekeeping operations. Nigeria also is well respected because it's a country that has been at the forefront in fighting against apartheid. So it is a very reliable and important partner of the United Nations, and I think it's well deserved that they will take over the presidency next year.
Okay. Somewhere the UN Secretary General sustained a campaign that there is need for the developed world to come up with their financial commitment towards the fight on climate change and global warming. How far were this during the 73rd session? Did you achieve this?
I think that the financial gaps to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals are huge. The World Bank, depending on where the figure comes from, but we are thinking about between 5 trillion and 7 trillion, the amount of money that we need to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, to fight poverty, to provide water and sanitation to everybody, to put in zero, to go to the target of zero hunger, to feed everybody, to have gender equality, etc., etc., etc. We need between 5 and 7 trillion. The gap is 50%. So we were able to gather 50% of the money and the resources we need. In climate change, it's also extremely dramatical because we put together what we call the Green Climate Fund. But the Green Climate Fund is still underfunded. Climate change requires the means of implementation. proper funding, capacity building, low carbon technology transfer to the developing world. There is a lot of work to do. In September, Secretary General is organizing a summit. One of the issues would be precisely to scale up the ambition on reducing emissions, and scale up the ambitions of money and of partnerships that would fund the huge gap to go into low carbon economies and low carbon societies. And it is a shared responsibility, but the responsibility is greater from the developing world to the developing world.
You're watching Diplomatic Ties. We'll take a break. When we return, more issues regarding the United Nations. Welcome to Diplomatic Ties.
And we're doing our best to make it as convenient and easy as possible for prospective students.
What we can do is just support the efforts of West African countries to integrate, to organize a better regional, political and economic integration.
Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Diplomatic ties, building friendship and enhancing oneness among nations. Watch Diplomatic Ties on NTA International.
Maria Espinosa, Foreign Affairs Minister, Ecuador, President of the 73rd Session of the United Nations General Assembly. How are you managing the two?
I'm just a committed person, a person that strongly believes in the power of multilateralism, that strongly believes that we need a United Nations that delivers for the people we serve, a United Nations that is relevant to all, a United Nations that is closer to the people. And that's why I am traveling and working also in New York every day to make sure that we are up to speed and we deserve and we gain, you know, the acknowledgement, the respect, and the buy-in of public opinion out there. So thank you very much.
Talking about the media, your last comments during the World Press Freedom Day, you said journalists will shine a spotlight on abuse, will tell stories that need to be told, will give voice to those whom nobody listens, will hold up a mirror to society, and if we don't like what we see, we should address the issues, not shut the messenger. What did you mean by this?
Well, I mean that to be a journalist is not a crime. It is a very important part of society. And I am not only me, but international instruments and international community were very much in favor of free press and security for journalists that you know, do their jobs. But I'm also in favor of responsible journalism with the capacity of telling the truth. And truthful news are also in need, and we have to also take you know, into account the risk of fake news, for example. So I think we need to find harmony and balance there. But above all, I think that journalists should be able to do their work safely, because they have a very important role in society.
So let's project into this 74th UN session of the United Nations General Assembly compared to the 73rd. What are your projections?
Well, we have done a lot this year. We have received a lot of mandates from member states. We will finish this session hopefully having met all the promises and the mandates. And I think what comes next is extremely. It's going to be an extremely busy agenda as well, starting in September with 5 summit-level events when New York will receive heads of state and government. So issues of universal health coverage, of the first cut of Sustainable Development Goals, the Climate Summit, financing for development, the Samoa pathway to assess progress in the development of small island developing states, and the next year we will prepare for the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. So there is a lot to do. The United Nations has to be up to speed and deliver. In every day. I'm sure we can deliver with more quality, with more commitment, and with greater capacity to touch and improve the lives of people, especially the ones in need.
It was nice sharing your time with you.
It was a pleasure.
Okay. That's it on the program. It was not having your time with us. Bye-bye.